I was 33 years old, finally clutching the diploma my parents demanded I earn, when the world tilted sideways and the stage lights went black. The hospital called my emergency contacts 3 times while I lay unconscious. My parents were too busy posting photos of my empty chair to answer the phone. It was only my grandfather who came running, breathless and shaking, arriving just in time to hold the hand they had quietly abandoned years ago. The mortarboard sat heavy on my head, a flat black lid designed to keep the chaos inside my skull from spilling out onto the floor. I stared at myself in the bathroom mirror of my small apartment, adjusting the tassel for the 3rd time. My face looked gray. It was the kind of gray that no amount of concealer could truly hide, the color of wet sidewalk cement or old newspaper. I was 33 years old, and in 2 hours, I would be walking across a stage to accept a master's degree in business administration. It should have been a victory lap. I had spent the last 3 years working 45 hours a week at a logistics firm while attending night classes that ran until 10. I had eaten dinner from vending machines. I had read textbooks on the subway, highlighting paragraphs while swaying against strangers. I had missed birthdays, weddings, and sleep. But as I looked at the dark circles under my eyes, I did not feel triumphant. I felt hunted. My phone buzzed on the porcelain rim of the sink. It was my mother. "Make sure you wear the heels." Audrey. The text read, "The nude ones. They make your legs look longer in the gown. We need good photos for the announcement." I put the phone down without replying. My legs were trembling, a subtle vibration in the muscles of my calves that had started 3 weeks ago and refused to stop. I told myself it was just adrenaline. I told myself it was just the caffeine. I told myself I could not afford to be sick, not today. For my parents, this graduation was not about my education. It was the season finale of a show they had been producing since I was born. They had already selected the restaurant for the celebration dinner, a place with white tablecloths and menu prices that made my stomach churn. They had dictated the guest list. They had even coached me on what to say if anyone asked about my current job, implying that I should embellish my title to sound more executive, more worthy of the daughter they wanted to present to the world. I sat on the edge of the bathtub and closed my eyes. The dizziness came then. A sudden tilting of the room that made me grip the cold enamel of the tub. It felt as if the floor had turned into water. My heart did a strange, fluttering flop in my chest, like a bird hitting a window pane. "Get up," I whispered to myself. "You just have to walk across a stage. You just have to smile. Then you can sleep for a week." I had been ignoring these symptoms for a month. The numbness in my fingers that made typing difficult, the shortness of breath that hit me even when I was sitting still, the headaches that started at the base of my skull and wrapped around my forehead like a tightening vice. I had no time for doctors. I had no money for copays. Every spare dollar I earned went to tuition or rent or the small, periodic emergencies my parents seemed to have. A memory from 2 weeks ago surfaced, sharp and uncomfortable. I had been at my parents' house for a mandatory Sunday dinner. My father had been grilling steaks, wearing a polo shirt that cost more than my car insurance, while my mother arranged a salad with surgical precision. "We need to update our files," my father had said, flipping a steak with a casual flick of his wrist, "just for safety. With you finishing school, there's a lot of paperwork shifting around. We want to help you get organized." I had been too tired to argue. I was eating a piece of bread, trying to keep my hands from shaking. "What do you need?" I asked. "Just everything," my mother said, smiling that bright, terrifying smile of hers. "Bring us your passport, your social security card, your birth certificate, and your insurance information. We bought a new fireproof safe. We want to keep copies for you. You know how you lose things." Audrey, I did not lose things. I was the one who kept track of shipping manifests for international freighters. I was the one who managed inventory spreadsheets with thousands of lines. But in their narrative, I was still the scattered child who lost a mitten in the snow when I was 6. It was easier to agree than to fight the character they had written for me, so I brought them the documents. I handed over the folder, and I watched my father nod with satisfaction as he tucked it away in his study. It felt like a violation, but I told myself it was love. I told myself that normal parents worried about safety. I told myself I should be grateful they cared enough to file my paperwork. Now, standing in my bathroom, I felt a wave of nausea. I swallowed it down. I stood up, steadied myself against the towel rack, and walked out the door. The graduation ceremony was held in a massive arena downtown. A concrete bowl filled with the roar of thousands of families. The air conditioning was fighting a losing battle against the heat of mid-June and the body warmth of the crowd. The air was thick and humid, smelling of cheap perfume and floor wax. I found my parents near the entrance to the seating area. They were impossible to miss. My mother was wearing a dress that shimmered like the scales of a tropical fish, a bright turquoise that demanded attention. My father was in a tailored suit, his hair perfectly coiffed. They looked like they were attending a gala, not a daytime graduation. "Audrey!" my mother shrieked, waving me over. She did not hug me. She grabbed my shoulders and turned me around, adjusting the hood of my gown. "You look pale," she said, her voice dropping to a critical whisper. "Did you put on blush? I told you to wear more blush. You look washed out." "I am fine." "Mom," I said, "I am just tired." "Well, wake up," my father said, clapping a hand on my back. "This is a big day. We have people watching." He pulled out his phone. "Smile," he commanded. I forced a smile. I knew the drill. I tilted my head. I opened my eyes wide. I pretended to be the happy, successful daughter. My father took 3 photos, checked them, frowned, and took 3 more. He did not ask how I was feeling. He did not ask if I was thirsty. He was busy typing a caption for the upload. "Proud parents moment," he muttered as he typed. "MBA Success Family Legacy." I felt a tug on my sleeve. I turned to see my grandfather standing there. He looked small in the crushing crowd. He was wearing his old brown suit, the one he wore to church on Easter and Christmas. It was a little loose in the shoulders now, and the elbows were shiny with age, but his shirt was crisp and white. He was holding a small bouquet of wildflowers wrapped in wet paper towels and tinfoil. "Grandpa." I breathed, feeling the tension in my chest loosen just a fraction. "I picked them from the garden," he said, his voice raspy. "I know they aren't the fancy store-bought ones, but I thought you might like the smell. They are the purple ones you used to like when you were a kid." "Thank you," I said, taking the damp bundle. "They are perfect." He looked at me, really looked at me, with eyes that were cloudy but sharp. "You okay, kiddo?" he asked. "You are shaking." "I am just nervous." I lied. He patted my hand. His skin was like dry paper, warm and rough. "You did good. Audrey, you worked hard for this. Don't let them make it about them. This is yours." I wanted to cry. I wanted to drop the facade and tell him that I felt like I was dying, that my heart was racing so fast it felt like a blurring fan blade, that I couldn't feel my fingertips. But my mother turned back to us, her eyes narrowing at the foil-wrapped flowers. "Oh, Dad," she said, her voice dripping with condescending sweetness. "Those are sweet, but maybe we leave them in the car? They are dripping on Audrey's gown. It will look messy in the pictures. I am keeping them." I said. My mother stiffened. "Suit yourself," she said. "Just hold them down low. We have to go find our seats," my father said, checking his watch. "We are in the front section. I pulled some strings to get us better tickets. We want a clear view when you walk." They turned and marched toward the VIP entrance, expecting me to follow with my eyes, to admire their influence. They did not look back. My grandfather gave my hand a squeeze. "I will be up in the bleachers," he said. "I will be cheering the loudest." I watched him walk away, moving slowly, using his cane to navigate the uneven concrete. I felt a sudden, sharp pang of fear, an irrational thought that I might never see him again. Then the marshals began herding the graduates into lines, and I was swept away in a river of black polyester. The ceremony was an endurance test. We sat in folding chairs on the main floor of the arena, Under the glare of massive floodlights, the speeches droned on, words about future and potential and leadership echoing off the walls. I tried to listen, but the sounds were becoming distorted. The voice of the keynote speaker sounded like it was coming from underwater. My hands were resting in my lap, but I couldn't feel them. I looked down and saw my fingers were white, bloodless. I tried to wiggle them, but the signal from my brain seemed to get lost on the way down. Panic began to rise in my throat, tasting like copper. I needed water. I looked around, but there were no water stations, only row after row of graduates sitting in solemn silence. Just hold on, I told myself. They are almost to the B's. Brooks, you are almost there. When they finally called the first row to stand, I used the chair in front of me to leverage myself up. The world swam. Dark spots danced in my vision, like ink dropped into clear water. I focused on the back of the person in front of me, a tall guy with a gold tassel. Follow the gold. I thought, just follow the gold. We shuffled toward the stage. The noise of the crowd was deafening, a constant roar of applause and air horns. Every time a name was called, a pocket of the arena erupted. I tried to look for my parents in the front section, but the lights were too bright. I could only see silhouettes. I imagined them there, phones raised, recording not for me, but for the feed. Audrey Brooks. The announcer's voice boomed. It was my turn. I stepped onto the ramp. The wood beneath my feet felt spongy, soft. I walked toward the center of the stage, toward the dean who was holding the leather-bound diploma cover. Smile. I commanded my face. I reached out my hand. The dean smiled, a practiced, generic expression of congratulations. As I took the diploma, the sound of the crowd suddenly cut out. It didn't fade. It just vanished. 1 second there was roaring, and the next, absolute silence. Then the lights stretched. The bright white spotlights elongated into streaks, like cars driving fast at night. The tunnel vision hit me hard, the black edges of my sight rushing inward until all I could see was the dean's red tie. I think I'm going to fall, I thought with a detached curiosity. I didn't feel the impact. I didn't feel my knees buckle or my shoulder hit the floor. There was just a sudden shift in gravity, and then the world went black. I woke up to the sensation of motion. I was lying on something flat and moving. There were voices, urgent and loud, hovering above me. "BP is dropping," a woman's voice said. "Get another line in." I opened my eyes. The ceiling of the arena was scrolling past, way too fast. I saw faces leaning over me, strangers in uniforms. I tried to speak, but my tongue felt like a dry sponge. "Audrey, can you hear me? Audrey?" I blinked. A man with kind eyes was looking down at me. "You took a spill," he said. "We are taking you to the ambulance. Just stay with us. My parents." I croaked. "We are calling them," he said. "Don't worry." The darkness came back then, softer this time, pulling me down into a deep, dreamless well. When I woke up again, the world was steady. I was in a room with white walls and bright fluorescent lights. There was a rhythmic beeping sound, the mechanical heartbeat of a monitor. I smelled antiseptic and rubbing alcohol. I turned my head. I was in an emergency room bay, separated from the hallway by a thin patterned curtain. My arm was heavy. I looked down and saw an IV line taped to the back of my hand, a clear tube running up to a bag of fluid. A nurse walked in. She was young, with her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail and a stethoscope around her neck. She saw my eyes open and smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. She looked frustrated. "Welcome back," she said, checking the monitor. "You gave everyone a scare. What happened?" I asked. My voice sounded raspy, like I had been screaming for hours. "You collapsed," she said. "Severe dehydration, exhaustion, and your iron levels are through the floor. We are running more tests to rule out cardiac issues, given your heart rate, but you are stable now." I tried to sit up, but the room spun, and I sank back into the pillow. "Where are my parents?" I asked. "They were at the ceremony. They were in the front row." The nurse's expression tightened. She picked up a clipboard from the counter and looked at it, then looked back at me. There was a pity in her gaze that made my stomach drop. "We tried calling them," she said gently. "We called the number listed as your primary emergency contact. We called 3 times. We left voicemails. No one picked up." I stared at her. The words didn't make sense. My parents lived on their phones. My mother checked her notifications every 30 seconds. My father had a smartwatch that buzzed whenever he got a call. "Did you try the right number?" I asked. "Maybe it was an old number. It was the number ending in 4509, she said, labeled father, and 4510 for mother. Those were the right numbers. "They didn't answer?" I whispered. "No. Honey," she said, "I am sorry. Sometimes signals are bad in those arenas." Signals were not bad. They had been posting photos. They had been texting me. They were there. They were right there. I felt a cold, hollow sensation spread through my chest. It was worse than the fainting. It was a clarity, sharp and brutal. They were not coming. I was lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to machines, my graduation gown cut open, and they were probably at the restaurant. They were probably angry that I had ruined the moment. They were probably explaining to their guests that I had a dramatic spell and they were handling it. The curtain was ripped back suddenly. "Audrey, it wasn't my parents. It was Grandpa. He looked like he had run a marathon. His face was flushed a deep, alarming red, and he was gasping for air. His tie was crooked, and he was leaning heavily on his cane, his knuckles white as he gripped the handle. "Grandpa," I said, tears instantly stinging my eyes. He stumbled to the side of the bed and grabbed my hand. His grip was fierce, shaking. "I am here," he wheezed. "I came as soon as I heard. I am here." "Audrey, how did you know?" I asked. "The hospital called me," he said, fighting to catch his breath. "But I was the secondary contact. They called me after they couldn't get the others." He looked around the room, his eyes wild and angry. "Where are they?" he demanded. "Where are your mother and father?" "I don't know," I said. They didn't answer. He let out a sound that was half growl, half sob. "I was across town," he said. "I was parked miles away because I couldn't afford the arena garage. I had to run to the car. I drove like a maniac. I thought—" He stopped, his chin trembling. He looked at me with such intensity that I wanted to look away. "Why are they still your contacts?" he asked, his voice low and trembling with rage. "Why do you trust them with your life? Audrey? When they can't even pick up a damn phone?" I didn't have an answer. I had always assumed that when it came to life and death, the narcissism would pause. I thought that biological imperative would override the ego. I was wrong. A woman in a blazer walked into the room. She was holding a tablet and wearing a hospital badge that said administration. She looked from my grandfather to me, sensing the tension. "Ms. Brooks," she said, "I am from patient registration. We just need to clarify some things about your admission paperwork." "Not now," Grandpa snapped. "Can't you see she is recovering?" "It is actually quite urgent regarding her access permissions," the woman said, her voice professional but firm. She stepped closer to the bed. "Ms. Brooks, we noticed a discrepancy when we were processing your intake. We have your grandfather listed as secondary, but we also see a flag on your file regarding a healthcare proxy and a release of information form." I frowned. "I haven't signed any proxy forms." I said, "I just have my standard insurance." The woman swiped on her tablet. "According to our records, these forms were uploaded and notarized 3 weeks ago. They grant full medical decision-making power and full access to your medical records and billing information to your parents." I froze. 3 weeks ago. The dinner. The Sunday dinner where they asked for my documents. The organization help. I didn't sign that. I said, "I gave them copies of my ID, but I never signed a proxy." The administrator looked concerned. "The signature on file matches your license," she said, "and it allows them to make decisions if you are incapacitated. It also allows them to speak with our billing department, which they have already attempted to do via the automated system while you were unconscious." My grandfather went very still. "What do you mean they attempted to do?" We have a log of an inquiry from your father's phone number, checking on the insurance status and billing address associated with the admission. The administrator said, about 20 minutes ago. They called the billing department? Grandpa asked, his voice rising. They didn't call the nurse's station to ask if she was alive, but they called the billing department? The room seemed to tilt again, but this time it wasn't from dehydration. It was from a sudden, sickening realization. They weren't just ignoring the call. They were managing the fallout. They were checking the money. I need to see that form, I said, my voice shaking. I can print a copy, the administrator said, but if you are saying you didn't sign this, Ms. Brooks, we have a very serious problem. This is a legal document. I looked at Grandpa. His face had gone from red to a terrifyingly pale white. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the wall, his eyes narrowing as he put pieces of a puzzle together that I was just beginning to see. It isn't just a proxy, is it? Grandpa whispered. He looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes. Not fear for me, but fear of what he was realizing about his own daughter. Audrey, he said, we need to lock everything down, right now. The administrator nodded slowly. I will get the forms to revoke the proxy immediately, and I will flag your file for extra privacy. No information released to anyone without a password. She left the room, her heels clicking on the linoleum. The sound echoed like a countdown. I lay back against the pillow, the plastic of the IV line digging into my skin. I thought about the documents I had handed over, my birth certificate, my social security card, my passport. I thought about the symptoms I had ignored, the dizziness, the stress, and I thought about my parents, sitting in the front row, posing for photos while I fell. They hadn't come to the hospital. They had logged into the billing portal. Grandpa squeezed my hand again. We are going to fix this, he said. But you have to promise me something. Audrey, anything, I whispered. Stop pretending they are good people, he said. I looked at the ceiling, fighting the tears that were finally spilling over. I couldn't pretend anymore. The evidence was in the tablet. The evidence was in the silence of my phone. The evidence was in the empty chairs beside my bed. I promise, I said, and as the fluids dripped into my veins, bringing me back to life, I realized that the collapse hadn't been the end of my life. It was the beginning of a war I didn't even know I was fighting. Grandpa pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, refusing to let go of my hand. We waited in the harsh light of the emergency room, two castaways on a raft, waiting for the sharks to circle back, and I knew they would. They always did. We just had to be ready. The hospital room was quiet in that distinct, unsettling way only hospitals achieve at night, a silence made of humming machines and the distant squeak of rubber soles on linoleum. They had moved me from the ER to a telemetry unit on the 4th floor. I was hooked up to a cardiac monitor that traced a jagged green line across a black screen. A constant reminder that my body had staged a mutiny. A doctor I hadn't seen before came in around 11. She looked tired, her lab coat slightly wrinkled, but her eyes were sharp and kind. She introduced herself as Dr. Aris. She pulled up a stool beside my bed and sat down, not rushing, which in a hospital felt like a luxury. We have your labs back. Audrey, she said. I braced myself. Is it my heart? In a way. She said, but not structural. You have a condition called POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. Essentially, your autonomic nervous system isn't regulating your blood flow correctly when you stand up. That is why you fainted, but that isn't the whole story. She tapped the chart in her hand. You are severely anemic. Your iron levels are dangerously low, and your cortisol levels, the stress hormone, are through the roof. It looks like you have been running a marathon every day for the last year without water or sleep. I stared at the blanket covering my legs. I worked full-time, I said, my voice sounding small. And I was doing my master's at night. I didn't want to stop. She looked at me for a long moment. It is not just the work. Audrey, we see exhaustion, But this is depletion. You are 33. You shouldn't be this empty. Do you have help at home? Someone making sure you eat? Someone asking how you are? The question hung in the air, heavy and awkward. I thought of my parents. I thought of the way my mother inspected my cuticles instead of asking about my classes. I thought of my father checking his watch while I talked about my job. I have my grandfather. I said, "That is good," she said, though her tone suggested she knew one elderly man wasn't enough to hold up a collapsing sky. "We are going to keep you overnight for observation and give you an iron infusion, but you need to rest. Audrey, real rest, not just sleeping, but stopping." She left, and the room felt bigger, colder. My phone, which had been sitting on the bedside table, lit up. It wasn't a call. It was a text. The name on the screen made my stomach clench. Mom. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the glass. Part of me wanted to throw the phone across the room. Part of me, the trained, conditioned part, felt the immediate urge to apologize for causing a scene. I unlocked the screen. "We are at the Italian place." The text read, "Aunt Carol and the cousins are asking where you are. We told them you had a little heat stroke. Please send a selfie or something for the family group chat." So everyone calms down. This whole day is a disaster. The professional photos are going to be ruined because we didn't get any of you walking. I read it twice. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "What did the doctor say?" Just damage control. Just image management. A second text popped up immediately after. "Dad is trying to call the hospital billing to make sure they have the right insurance info so we don't get hit with a crazy bill. But they won't talk to him. You need to call them and authorize him. Now." I put the phone down, face down, on the plastic table. I felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with my anemia. It was a physical rejection of them, a visceral disgust that rose up from my gut. Grandpa was sitting in the recliner in the corner. He had refused to leave, even when the nurses offered to call him a cab. He was dozing, his head tipped back, his mouth slightly open. He looked frail in the dim light, his skin like crumpled parchment. He stirred as I moved, his eyes snapping open with a start. "I am awake," he said, sitting up straight and rubbing his face. "I am awake. You okay?" I got a text. I said, "They are at the restaurant. They are mad about the photos." Grandpa let out a long, ragged sigh. He reached for his cane and used it to pull himself up. Shuffling over to my bedside, "I am sorry." "Audrey," he said, "I am so sorry I wasn't faster." "You came," I said. "You were the only one who came." "I was listed as secondary," he said, his voice hard. "The hospital told me. They called your parents first, 3 times. Then they called me. I was driving. I didn't recognize the number, so I let it go to voicemail. When I listened to it..." He stopped, his hand trembling as he gripped the bed rail. I heard the nurse's voice on that message. "Audrey." She sounded scared, and I knew your parents weren't picking up, because if it was good news, they would have been the first to know. If it was bad news... He looked away, his jaw working. "They are useless. Audrey, I have tried to make excuses for them for 40 years because they are my blood. But leaving you here, leaving you alone while they eat pasta and worry about pictures, that is not family. That is a parasite." The word hung there, parasite. It felt violent, but it also felt true. "I need to check something," I said. "The administrator mentioned a proxy. She said I signed it 3 weeks ago." I picked up my phone again, ignoring the unread texts from my mother, and opened the browser. I navigated to the hospital's patient portal. My fingers felt clumsy, thick. I had to reset my password because I couldn't remember the last time I used it. When I finally got in, I went to the Documents tab. There it was, Healthcare Proxy and HIPAA Release. Status, active. Date, May 24th. I clicked on the PDF. It opened slowly on the small screen. I zoomed in. My name was printed at the top. My parents' names were listed as the agents, and at the bottom, there was a signature. It was a looping, elegant script. It looked like mine. It looked exactly like mine. But I had not signed this. On May 24th, I was at work until 8. Then I went straight to the library to study for finals. I remembered that day vividly because I had spilled coffee on my notes. I hadn't been anywhere near a notary. "Grandpa, look at this," I whispered. He leaned in, squinting at the screen. "That is your signature," he said. "It looks like it." I said, "But I didn't sign it." He looked at me, his face grim. "You gave them your documents, Audrey. You gave them samples of everything." A chill went through me. I had handed them the folder. I had given them the blueprint to become me. I scrolled down. There was another form. Consent for billing communication. It authorized my father to discuss all financial matters related to my medical care. I felt sick. "Why do they want this?" I asked. "Why do they want to control my hospital bills?" "I have my own insurance. I pay my own premiums." Grandpa didn't answer. He was staring at the door, as if he expected them to burst in. Just then, a woman knocked on the open door. She was pushing a small cart with a laptop on it. She wore a navy blue vest over her clothes. "Ms. Brooks?" she asked. "I am from the billing department. I am sorry to bother you so late. But we have a flag on your account regarding insurance, and we wanted to clear it up before the morning shift change." "Come in," I said, sitting up a little straighter. She rolled the cart closer. "We have your insurance on file as Northeast Mutually," she said, "but when we ran the eligibility check, it came back as terminated." "Terminated?" I said. "That is impossible. I have Blue Cross. I have had it for 3 years through my job." She frowned and tapped on her keyboard. "That is not what is in the system. The system was updated 2 weeks ago. A change of insurance form was submitted, listing Northeast Mutually as your primary provider, and the address for the subscriber was changed to—" She turned the screen toward me. The address was my parents' house. I stared at the glowing letters. 14 Oak Creek Drive. I didn't change my insurance. I said, my voice rising in pitch, "I have Blue Cross. I have my card right here." I fumbled for my purse on the side table, digging through it with shaking hands until I found the blue and white card. I held it out to her. "See? This is my insurance." The billing woman took the card and looked at it. She looked confused. "If this is active," she said, "then someone manually overrode the system with incorrect information, and they changed the billing address." "Why would someone do that?" I asked. She hesitated. "Usually, when we see this, it is because someone is trying to divert the explanation of benefits. If the EOB goes to a different address, the patient doesn't see what is being billed, or what?" Grandpa asked. "Or they are trying to use a different policy to cover something the patient doesn't know about," she said carefully. "But in this case, the policy they entered is invalid. It looks like an old plan from when you were a dependent." My stomach dropped. They had tried to switch my insurance back to their old plan, or a fake one, and route the mail to their house. They didn't want me to see the bill. I realized, but why? "I need to make a call." I said, "I need to call Blue Cross. It is midnight." "Audrey," Grandpa said gently. "I don't care." I said, "They have a 24-hour line." The billing woman nodded. "I will update the system with this card, Ms. Brooks, and I will put a lock on the demographic information so it can't be changed without a passcode. Do you want to set a verbal password?" "Yes," I said. "Orchid." She typed it in. "Okay, no one gets info without saying Orchid." She left, and I immediately dialed the number on the back of my insurance card. I put it on speaker so Grandpa could hear. The hold music was tinny and cheerful, a stark contrast to the dread pooling in my gut. Finally, a representative answered. "Blue Cross? This is Kevin." "Hi," I said. "My name is Audrey Brooks. I need to check if there have been any changes to my policy recently, specifically my address." I gave him my details. I heard him typing. "Yes, Ms. Brooks," Kevin said. "We received a change of address request on June 1st. The new address is 14 Oak Creek Drive." I closed my eyes. They had done it. They had moved my mail. "Was that authorized by me?" I asked. "It was submitted through the online portal," Kevin said, "so it was done with your login credentials." I never gave them my login, I whispered, but I had used the same password for everything since high school. My parents knew the name of my first pet. They knew my mother's maiden name. They knew everything. Kevin, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I did not make that change. I need you to change it back to my apartment address immediately. And I need to know if any claims have been filed recently. Let me look, he said. Okay. I see the ambulance ride from today pending. That is odd. What? I asked. There is a claim from 2 weeks ago. He said, for a consultation with a doctor. Vane, a geriatric psychiatrist. The room went silent. A psychiatrist? I repeated. I have never seen a psychiatrist. It was a telehealth visit. Kevin said, billed for 60 minutes. Diagnosis code. Cognitive decline. I felt like I had been punched in the throat. Cognitive decline. Kevin, I said, my voice trembling. That wasn't me. That was fraud. I see, he said, his voice shifting to a more serious tone. I am going to transfer you to our fraud department. But Ms. Brooks, if someone has your login, you need to change everything, right now. I hung up. I couldn't breathe. Grandpa was gripping his cane so hard his knuckles were white. Cognitive decline. He repeated, Audrey, they are building a case. A case for what? I asked. To take over, he said. If they can prove you are confused, if they can prove you are unstable and they have a proxy. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Grandpa, I said, the mail. He looked at me. You asked me a few months ago why I never got letters anymore. I said, I told you I went paperless, but I didn't. I just stopped getting mail. I thought it was just junk mail stopping. I knew it, he said, slamming his hand on the armrest. I knew it. I saw your mother's car near your apartment complex 3 times last month. I asked her what she was doing, and she said she was dropping off soup. But you never mentioned soup. She has a key to my mailbox. I said, I gave her a spare key 3 years ago when I went out of town for a week. I never asked for it back. She has been stealing my mail. I said, and if she has your mail, Grandpa said, she has everything. Credit card offers, bank statements, tax forms. I grabbed my phone again. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type. I downloaded the Credit Karma app. I had never used it before because I was careful with money. I had 1 credit card and my student loans. I knew what I owed, or I thought I did. I went through the setup process. It asked me to verify my identity. Which of these addresses have you lived at? Which of these car loans is yours? One of the options was for a Toyota Sienna. I didn't own a Toyota. I clicked none of the above. It took a minute to load. Then the dashboard appeared. My credit score was 620. It had been 786 months ago. I clicked on Open Accounts. There was my student loan. There was my 1 credit card. And then there was a list that went on and on. Personal loan. Prosper. $15,000. Opened April 12th. Credit card. Chase Sapphire. Balance $8,400. Opened March 3rd. Auto loan. Alley Financial. $32,000. Opened February 28th. I gasped. The sound was wet and choked. What is it? Grandpa asked. He stood up and leaned over the bed. Look, I whispered. He stared at the screen. $32,000? He said. For a car? You drive a 10-year-old Honda. They bought a car. I said, they bought a car in my name. And a loan. He said, pointing to the $15,000. What is that for? I don't know. I said, I scrolled down to inquiries. There were 12 hard inquiries in the last 6 months. Banks, credit unions, loan servicers. They have been busy. Grandpa said. His voice was cold, deadly quiet. This wasn't an accident. Audrey, this wasn't a misunderstanding. This is a job. They have been working this like a job. I felt the tears coming then, hot and stinging. It wasn't just the money. Money could be fixed. It was the betrayal. It was the realization that while I was studying until my eyes burned, while I was eating ramen to save $5, while I was trying to make them proud, they were systematically stripping me for parts. They were stealing my future to pay for their present. I'm going to be sick, I said. I grabbed the plastic basin from the bedside table and dry heaved. Nothing came up but bile. My body was empty. Grandpa rubbed my back. His hand was heavy and warm. "It is okay," he said. "Get it out. Get the poison out." When I finished, I lay back, exhausted. I felt hollowed out. "We need help." Grandpa said, "We can't do this alone." I pressed the call button. When the nurse came in, I asked to see a social worker. "At 1 a.m?" she asked. "Please," I said. "It is an emergency." She must have seen the look on my face, the desperation, the terror, because she nodded. "Let me see who is on call." 20 minutes later, a woman named Sarah walked in. She was young, wearing a cardigan and holding a notebook. She listened while I explained. I showed her the credit report. I showed her the texts. I told her about the proxy. She didn't look surprised. That was the saddest part. She looked resigned. "This is financial abuse," she said, "and it is identity theft. But because they are your parents, it is going to be messy. Police often write this off as a civil matter unless you have hard proof of forgery. I have the proxy." I said, "I didn't sign it." "That is a start." Sarah said, "You need to lock everything down, right now. You need to freeze your credit at all 3 bureaus. You need to call your bank and put a fraud alert on your accounts. You need to change every password you have to something random. Strings of numbers and letters that make no sense. Do not use words. Do not use dates." She handed me a pamphlet. Steps for Identity Theft Recovery. I feel so stupid. I said, "I let them do this. I gave them the documents. I gave them the keys. Stop that." Grandpa said. He stood up, his cane hitting the floor with a thud. "Don't you dare." "Audrey, shame is how they get you. Shame is the lock on the cage. You trusted your parents. That is not a flaw in your character. It is a flaw in theirs." Sarah nodded. He is right. Abusers rely on the victim feeling too embarrassed to report them. They rely on you thinking, "How could I be so blind?" But you weren't blind. You were a daughter. I nodded, wiping my eyes. "Okay," I said. "I will freeze the credit." I spent the next 2 hours on my phone. It was tedious. Soul-crushing work, answering security questions, creating pins, verifying emails. Every click felt like I was building a wall, brick by brick, between me and the people who raised me. Around 3 I finally put the phone down. Grandpa had fallen asleep in the chair again. I watched him breathe. The rise and fall of his chest, the only steady thing in my world. I didn't sleep. I watched the sun come up, turning the sky from black to a bruised purple. At 7 a.m., the door opened. I expected the nurse, or doctor, Aris. Instead, my mother walked in. She was wearing fresh makeup and a bright floral blouse. She was carrying a Starbucks cup and a balloon that said, "Get well soon," in cheerful, bubbly letters. My father was behind her, wearing his golf polo and holding a stack of magazines. "Audrey!" she cried, rushing over. "Oh my God, you look terrible." She tried to hug me. I flinched. I physically recoiled, pressing myself back into the pillows. She stopped, looking offended. "We have been so worried. We were calling all night, but no one would tell us anything. They said we were removed from the list." I stared at her. I looked at the way her eyes darted around the room, not landing on me, but scanning the counters, the table. She wasn't looking for my health chart. She was looking for my phone. "We were worried sick," my father added. He didn't look worried. He looked annoyed. "We had to cancel the dinner. It was very embarrassing." "You canceled the dinner," I said. My voice was flat. "Well, we couldn't celebrate without the graduate. Could we?" my mother said with a nervous laugh. She put the balloon on the table. It bobbed there, mocking me. "Listen," she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "We need to sort out this billing thing. The hospital is being ridiculous. They wouldn't let your father confirm the insurance. Just sign the authorization form so we can handle it for you. You need to rest. You don't need to worry about money." She reached into her oversized purse and pulled out a piece of paper. It was already folded. Just sign here, she said, holding out a pen. I will take it to the front desk. I looked at the paper. It was a release of financial responsibility. And then I looked at my father. He was already inching toward the door, looking for the billing office sign in the hallway. They weren't here to see me. They were here to plug the leak before I noticed the ship was sinking. I didn't take the pen. Grandpa? I said. Grandpa woke up instantly. He saw them, and his face transformed. The fatigue vanished, replaced by a stony, cold anger. Get out, he said. My mother jumped. Dad, I didn't see you there. Get out, he repeated. Oh, stop being dramatic, my father said, stepping back into the room. We are just trying to help her. She is sick. She can't manage this paperwork. She isn't signing anything. Grandpa said. He stood up, blocking the space between them and my bed. My mother's smile faltered. Audrey, tell him to stop. We need to fix the insurance. There was a mix-up with the address. A mix-up, I said. My voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. Yes, my mother said, her eyes wide. The computer system glitched. You know how technology is. It wasn't a glitch. Mom, I said, you changed it. You changed it to your house, and you opened a credit card, and you bought a car. The silence that followed was absolute. My mother's face went slack. For a split second, I saw the panic. The mask slipped, and I saw the terrified, grasping stranger underneath. Then, just as quickly, the mask was back. She looked hurt. She looked devastated. Audrey Brooks, she said, clutching her chest. How can you say that? After everything we have done for you, we are co-signers. We were helping you build credit. By buying a Toyota? I asked. That is for the business, my father stammered. The family business. It benefits you eventually. I don't have a business. I said. You are ungrateful, my mother hissed. The sweetness was gone now. Her eyes were hard little stones. You are confused. The doctor said you are sick. You aren't thinking clearly. I am thinking clearly for the first time in years, I said. My father took a step toward me. Listen, Audrey, you are making a mistake. If you start digging into things you don't understand, you are going to cause a lot of trouble. For everyone. Is that a threat? Grandpa asked. It is reality, my father said. He looked at me, and his eyes were cold. You need us. You can't survive on your own. You proved that yesterday when you face-planted on that stage. You are weak. Audrey, you have always been weak. Let us handle it. He reached for the paper in my mother's hand. Just sign it. I looked at him. I remembered him taking the photos while I stood there trembling. I remembered the text about the ruined pictures. No, I said. My mother gasped. Leave, Grandpa said. Before I call security. My father sneered. Fine, be that way. But when the bills start piling up, don't come crying to us. They turned and walked out. My mother snatched the balloon back as she left. I watched them go. The room was quiet again. Grandpa sat back down. He looked older than he had 10 minutes ago. They are scared. He said, Good, I said. I looked at the empty doorway. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't the palpitations. It was something else. It was the feeling of a tether snapping. They had always told me I was weak. They had told me I couldn't manage. They had told me I needed them. But looking at the credit report on my phone, looking at the thousands of dollars of debt they had racked up in my name, I realized something. They didn't think I was weak. They needed me to be weak, because if I was strong, they couldn't use me. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for the hospital billing office. This is Audrey Brooks, I said when they answered. Password Orchid. I want to speak to someone about a fraud investigation. The silence in the hospital room following my request for a fraud investigation was thick enough to choke on. My mother stood near the foot of the bed, her hand still clutching the strap of her oversized designer purse, her knuckles white. My father had stopped his retreat toward the door and turned back, his face flushing a mottled, angry red. You are making a scene, Audrey, my mother said. Her voice was low. pitched to that specific frequency of disappointed martyr she had perfected over 3 decades. We come here to support you, to help you handle the administrative mess you are clearly too sick to manage. And you accuse us of crimes? I am not accusing you of anything you haven't done. I said, my voice was raspy, but the iron infusion must have been working because I felt a strange, cold clarity in my veins. I saw the credit report. Mom, I saw the car loan. I saw the credit cards. My father stepped forward, pointing a finger at me. That is family business. We leverage credit to keep things moving. We have always done that. It is how we kept a roof over your head. It is how we paid for your braces. You think that money just appeared out of thin air? I am 33 years old. I said, you don't get to leverage my credit to pay for your lifestyle. And you definitely don't get to sign a healthcare proxy saying I am incompetent so you can hide the bills. It was just paperwork, my mother cried out, throwing her hands up. The hospital sends so many forms. We probably signed a stack of them without looking closely. We were panicked. Audrey, you were unconscious. You signed it 3 weeks ago. I said, on May 24th. I wasn't unconscious then. I was at work. My mother's eyes darted to my father. A quick, panicked flicker. You are ungrateful, she spat. The venom in her voice was sudden and shocking. We have sacrificed everything for you. We gave you everything, and the minute you get a little degree, you think you are better than us? You think you can just discard your family? I am not discarding you, I said, feeling the tears prick my eyes despite my anger. I am stopping you. My father took another step, his posture looming. Listen to me. Young lady. Enough. The word cracked through the room like a whip. Grandpa was standing fully upright, his cane held firmly in his right hand. Not for support, but like a weapon. He had moved between the bed and my father, a fragile but immovable barrier. Get out, Grandpa said. My father scoffed. Dad, stay out of this. You don't understand the financial complexities. I understand that you are thieves, Grandpa said. His voice wasn't loud, but it shook with a rage so deep it vibrated in the air. I understand that you are preying on your own daughter. I have watched you leech off people for 40 years, but I will not watch you eat her alive. Get out. My mother looked at Grandpa, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. You are turning her against us, she whispered. You always wanted to take her side. There are no sides. Grandpa said, there is right, and there is wrong. And you two have been wrong for a long time. Now leave, before I press the call button and have security escort you out. And believe me, I will tell them exactly why you are being removed. My father glared at him, his jaw working. Then he looked at me. You are going to regret this. Audrey, when you are drowning in debt and alone, don't call us. We won't, I said. My father turned on his heel and marched out. My mother lingered for a second, giving me one last look of tearful, wounded accusation before following him when the door clicked shut. The energy in the room collapsed. Grandpa sank back into the recliner, his hand trembling as he reached for his water cup. I am sorry, he whispered. I should have done that years ago. I watched him, realizing that for the first time in my life, the performance had been stopped. Usually, they spun the narrative until I apologized. Usually, they wore me down until I agreed that I was the problem. But not today. Why were they so desperate? I asked. It felt like they were rushing. Grandpa took a long sip of water. He looked at me over the rim of the cup, his eyes sad and tired. I have a guess, he said, but you aren't going to like it. Tell me. He set the cup down. When you were born, I set up a small trust for you, an educational trust. It wasn't millions. Audrey, just a little money I put aside from the sale of the hardware store. I wanted it to be a safety net. I frowned. I never knew about a trust. I know. He said, I didn't tell you, and I certainly didn't tell them. I knew if they knew about it, they would find a way to get it. They would have guilted you into signing it over for a family emergency or a business opportunity that didn't exist. So where is it? I asked. It was set to mature and released to you upon the completion of a graduate degree or when you turned 35, he said, whichever came first. I stared at him. The graduation. They knew. I whispered, I don't know how. Grandpa said, maybe I left a statement out once. Maybe they went through my mail. But they knew that the moment you walked across that stage, $40,000 was going to be released to your name. $40,000. It was a life-changing amount of money for me. It was my student loans. It was a down payment on a house where no one had a key but me. They wanted control of it. I said, the pieces clicking together like a sickening kaleidoscope. That is why they needed the proxy. That is why they needed the power of attorney. If they could prove I was incapacitated, if they could prove you were medically unfit to manage your finances, Grandpa finished, his voice grim. They could petition the court, or just use the forms they forged, to have the funds directed to a custodial account, an account they controlled. I felt a chill that went deeper than the hospital air conditioning. They weren't just stealing my credit score, they were waiting for a payout. My collapse on stage wasn't a tragedy to them, it was an opportunity. It was the perfect evidence for the narrative they were building. Audrey is weak. Audrey is sick. Audrey is confused. A knock on the door made us both jump. A woman in a blazer walked in. She introduced herself as Miss Halloway, a patient advocate. She looked serious, holding a tablet against her chest. Ms. Brooks, she said, the billing department flagged your account for fraud, and they notified administration. I wanted to come speak with you personally about your privacy status. Thank you. I said, I want everything locked down. It is, she said, but I also wanted to bring something to your attention. I reviewed the call logs for your admission record. She tapped the screen. At 9:30 this morning, while you were still being stabilized in the ER, we received a call from a man identifying himself as your father. He asked to speak with our legal department. About what? I asked, my mouth dry. He wanted to inquire about the hospital's procedure for enacting an emergency power of attorney. She said, he specifically asked what documentation would be needed if the patient, you, were to remain. And I quote, confused and unable to recognize family for an extended period. I looked at Grandpa. He looked like he was going to be sick. I was awake by 10. I said, I knew who I was. I knew who they were. Ms. Halloway nodded. Exactly. Your medical notes indicate you were alert and oriented. There was no medical basis for a competency hearing, but the inquiry suggests that, well, it suggests they were preparing for a different outcome. They wanted me to stay sick. I said, Ms. Halloway looked uncomfortable. I cannot speculate on their intent, but given the discrepancy with your insurance and the proxy form you say you didn't sign, I strongly advise you to seek legal counsel immediately upon discharge. We can keep them out of your room, Ms. Brooks, but we can't protect you once you leave this building. I understand. I said, she left, and I sat in silence, listening to the monitor beep. We need a lawyer. Grandpa said, a real one. I was discharged the next morning. The doctor was reluctant, given my stress levels. But I insisted. I couldn't stay in that bed anymore. I felt like a sitting duck. Grandpa drove me in his rattled old sedan. We didn't go to my apartment. We went to a small brick building in the older part of town, wedged between a bakery and a dry cleaner. The sign on the door read, Maris Ellery, attorney at law. Maris was a friend of Grandpa's from his hardware store days. She was a sharp-featured woman in her 60s, with silver hair cut in a severe bob and glasses that hung on a chain around her neck. Her office smelled of old paper and peppermint tea. She listened without interrupting as I laid it all out, the timeline, the proxy, the text messages, the credit report, the trust. When I finished, she took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. This is a mess. Audrey, she said, but it is a very specific kind of mess. I see this more often than you would think. It is called financial coercion, but it is often dressed up as family management. She pulled a yellow legal pad toward her. Here's the problem, she said, drawing a line down the center. On this side, we have the criminal acts, identity theft, forgery, fraud. Those are police matters. But on this side, We have the civil gray area. If they can produce a piece of paper with a signature that looks like yours, and if they can claim you gave them verbal permission, which they will, it becomes a he said, she said, but I didn't sign it. I insisted. I believe you. Maris said, but the burden of proof is on us. We need to prove not just that you didn't sign it, but that they did. We need a paper trail that shows a pattern of intent. She leaned forward. You need to understand how dangerous these documents are. A healthcare proxy doesn't just let them talk to doctors. Combined with the financial clauses they slipped in, it creates a presumption of authority. If they had succeeded in getting you declared incompetent even temporarily, they could have drained that trust fund in 48 hours and called it reimbursement for care expenses. I shivered. They were going to bill me for my own collapse. What do? I asked. First, Maris said, we revoke everything. I will draft a formal revocation of all prior powers of attorney and proxies. We will have it notarized today. We will send it certified mail to your parents, your bank, your doctors, and the hospital. That stops the bleeding. Second, she continued, writing furiously, you need to secure your physical perimeter. If they have keys to your apartment, change the locks. If they have access to your mail, get a P.O. box, and you need to find out exactly what documents they have in their possession. My birth certificate. I said, my passport. Get them back, Maris said, or report them stolen and get new ones. But you need to check your own records. If they have been doing this for months, there will be physical evidence, letters they hid, statements they intercepted. She looked at me, her eyes hard. Go home. Audrey, tear your apartment apart. Look for anything that doesn't belong, and look for anything that is missing. Grandpa drove me to my apartment. It was a small one-bedroom on the second floor of a complex that had seen better days, but it was mine, or I thought it was. As I unlocked the door, my hand shook. The key turned smoothly, too smoothly. I stepped inside. The air was stale. Everything looked exactly as I had left it 3 days ago. My coffee cup was still on the counter. My shoes were kicked off by the door. But as I walked further in, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. It was a subtle feeling, a vibration in the air. Someone had been here. I went straight to the closet in the hallway where I kept a small fireproof box. It was tucked behind my winter coats, under a pile of old blankets. I pulled it out. The latch was unlocked. I always locked it. I opened the lid. It wasn't empty, but it was light. My passport was gone. My birth certificate was gone. The title to my car, my actual car, the Honda, was gone. And there was a folder labeled Loans/School that I had kept since my undergraduate years. It was usually thick with promissory notes and payment schedules. It was empty. They took the history. I whispered. Grandpa was standing in the doorway, leaning on his cane. Check the desk, he said. I went to my small desk in the corner. I opened the drawers. They looked tidy, too tidy. My stack of unpaid bills was gone. My checkbook was there. But when I opened the register, I saw 3 checks had been torn out from the back of the book. Checks 1501, 1502, and 1503. I scrambled to log into my bank account on my phone. I checked the recent transactions. Nothing yet. They were holding them. They were waiting. Grandpa, I said, panic rising in my throat. They have blank checks. Cancel the account. Grandpa said, close it all. I sat down on the floor, surrounded by the violation of my own life. It wasn't just about money. It was the intimacy of the theft. They had come into my home, moved my coats, opened my boxes, and selected the pieces of me they wanted to use. We need to check the school, I said. The trust was tied to the degree, the refund. There is always a refund from the final semester's loans if you overborrow for living expenses. I never asked for it because I wanted to minimize the debt, but if it was automatic, I grabbed my laptop. I logged into the university's student finance portal. My hands flew across the keyboard. Account activity. Spring semester. There it was. Refund issued. May 15th. Check mailed. $4,200. Mailed to where? I clicked on the transaction details. Mailed to 14 Oak Creek Drive, my parents' house. I clicked View Image. The university scanned all cashed checks. The image popped up on the screen. It was a standard university check, made out to Audrey Brooks. On the back, in the endorsement line, was a signature. Audrey Brooks. It was perfect. The loop of the A, the sharp slant of the B. If I hadn't known I was sitting in a library studying on May 20th, when this was cashed, I would have sworn I signed it. Underneath my signature, there was a second endorsement, paid to the order of Stephen Brooks, and then my father's signature. I turned the laptop around so Grandpa could see. They forged my name. I said, "They signed it over to themselves." Grandpa stared at the screen. He leaned in close, his nose almost touching the glass. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked terrified. "That B," he whispered. "What?" "Look at the B in Brooks," he said, pointing a shaking finger. "The way it loops back at the bottom. You don't do that. Audrey, you cross your B straight." I looked closer. He was right. My signature was a little sharper. This one had a slight flourish. "Who does that?" I asked. "I do," Grandpa said. I stared at him. "I co-signed your first car loan," he said, his voice barely audible. "The one we got when you were 19. Your father handled the paperwork because I was out of town for work. I signed a bunch of papers he sent me." He looked up at me, his eyes wide with horror. "They didn't just practice your signature, Audrey. They have been studying mine. That flourish. That is how I signed things 20 years ago." He sank onto the edge of my bed. "If they can forge your name," he said, "and if they can forge mine, then no document is safe." I finished. "And if they have your passport," he added, "they have your face." I stood up and began pacing the small room. The anxiety that had plagued me for years, the constant, humming dread that something was wrong, that I was forgetting something, that I was in trouble, suddenly made sense. It wasn't a chemical imbalance. It wasn't generalized anxiety disorder. It was instinct. I had been living in a house with predators. My body knew it before my brain did. The heart palpitations, the dizziness, the constant feeling of walking on eggshells. It wasn't because I was weak. It was because I was being hunted. I stopped pacing. I looked at the empty fireproof box. "We need more proof," I said. "This check is good. It shows forgery. But they will say I signed it and gave it to them to pay them back for something. They will lie. We need something they can't lie about." Grandpa said. I looked at the pile of papers on my desk. "Maris said we need a pattern." I said, "I remembered something. A folder I hadn't looked at in years because it was painful. The folder from my undergraduate years. The one with the rejection letters from the colleges I really wanted to go to. I kept it in the bottom drawer, buried under old tax returns. I pulled the drawer open. The folder was there. College apps. I opened it. Inside were the rejection letters. "We regret to inform you." But as I flipped through them, something caught my eye. The date on the rejection letter from the State University, my dream school. April 15th, 2008. I looked at the envelope it came in. The postmark. April 20th, 2008. But the letter inside, the paper felt different. It felt slightly thicker than the other letters, and the logo at the top was slightly pixelated. I held it up to the light. There was no watermark. I grabbed a rejection letter from a different school. I held it up. A faint linen watermark was visible. This one was a copy, or a fake. Why would they fake a rejection letter? I asked aloud. Grandpa looked over. "What?" I didn't get into state. I said, "I was devastated. That is why I went to the local community college and lived at home for 2 more years. That is why I stayed under their roof." I handed him the letter. "I think I did get in." I said, "I think they hid the acceptance letter and gave me this instead. To keep me home. To keep me claiming them as dependents on financial aid forms. To keep me under control." Grandpa took the paper. His hands were shaking so hard the paper rattled. "This is evil," he whispered. "This isn't just money. This is your life. They stole your life." "Audrey." I felt a cold rage settle in my chest. displacing the fear. They had stolen my education. They had stolen my credit. They had stolen my graduation. And now they wanted to steal my future. I grabbed my car keys. "Where are we going?" Grandpa asked. "To the bank." I said, "The one on the check. We are going to get the surveillance footage, and then we are going to burn their whole world down." I didn't feel dizzy anymore. I didn't feel faint. I felt like the avenging angel they had created. "Let's go," Grandpa said, struggling to his feet. "I'm driving. You are still on medical leave." He wasn't, but I let him take the keys. He needed to fight this too. He needed to redeem the signature they had stolen from him. As we walked out to the car, I looked at the dark windows of my apartment building. I wondered if they were watching. I hoped they were. I wanted them to see me coming. I spent the next 72 hours living in a purgatory of hold music. People talk about identity theft as a crime of numbers: money lost, scores dropped, accounts drained. They do not talk about the theft of time. They do not talk about the hours spent sitting on the floor of a one-bedroom apartment, phone pressed to a hot ear, repeating your mother's maiden name to a stranger in a call center who does not care that the name belongs to the thief. "I am Audrey Brooks," I said to a representative from Equifax. "My social security number is—" "I am Audrey Brooks," I said to the fraud department at Chase. I did not open that account. "I am Audrey Brooks," I said to the student loan servicer. I did not endorse that check by the third day. The sound of my own name felt foreign, like a word I had repeated too many times until it lost its meaning. I wasn't Audrey Brooks anymore. I was case number 49721. I was a victim impact statement. I was a liability. Freezing my credit was the easy part. It took 3 clicks on 3 websites. But unraveling the knot my parents had tied was like trying to perform surgery on yourself without a mirror. Every time I pulled a thread, I found another snag. I found a Macy's card opened in 2019, maxed out and closed. I found a payday loan from a storefront lender in a town 3 hours away, defaulted. I found a utility bill for a house I had never lived in, under a variation of my name, A. E. Brooks. My hands were stained with printer ink. I had bought 3 packs of highlighters and a massive 3-ring binder. Grandpa had brought it over, along with a box of donuts and a thermos of coffee that tasted like mud. He sat in my armchair, watching me sort papers into piles. Fraud. Maybe fraud. Legitimate. The legitimate pile was terrifyingly small. "You need to eat," he said, pointing to a glazed donut. "I can't," I said. "I found another inquiry. Someone tried to open a line of credit at a furniture store last week, the day before graduation. They were redecorating," Grandpa muttered. "On your grave." We had a meeting that afternoon with a detective from the Financial Crimes Unit. His name was Detective Miller. He looked exactly like a detective was supposed to look. Weary, rumpled, with a tie that had seen better decades. His desk was buried under stacks of manila folders that looked like landslides waiting to happen. He listened to me for 20 minutes. He looked at the police report I had filed online. He looked at the affidavit of forgery I had signed at the bank. "Here is the reality, Ms. Brooks," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Identity theft cases are a volume business. We have hundreds of these a month, usually. It is a stranger in another country buying gift cards. Those are dead ends. It isn't a stranger," I said. "It is my parents. That actually makes it harder," he said. I stared at him. How does that make it harder? "I know exactly who they are. I know where they live. Because families share access," he said. He picked up a pen and clicked it rhythmically. "A defense attorney will argue that you gave them verbal permission. They will argue that you benefited from the purchases. They will argue that this is a civil dispute about money management, not a criminal case of theft. Unless we have a smoking gun, a video of them forging your signature, or a recording of them admitting it, the district attorney is hesitant to touch family cases. They get messy. People recant. I won't recant." I said, "Everyone says that in the beginning." Miller said, "Then Thanksgiving rolls around, or a grandkid is born, and suddenly, they don't want mom and dad in handcuffs." I leaned forward. They stole my tuition refund. They took out a life insurance policy on my car loan. This isn't borrowing money. This is predation. Miller sighed. I believe you. But belief isn't evidence. I need a timeline. I need you to build a case that proves beyond a reasonable doubt that you could not have made these transactions. I need to know where you were on every single date a document was signed. I need proof of non-consent. I looked at the binder in my lap. I will get it. I said, start with the check. He said, the one from the university. You said it was cashed at a local branch? Yes. 2 weeks ago. If we can get the surveillance footage, that is a start. Banks wipe their tapes every 30 to 60 days. You need to move fast. Grandpa stood up. We are going to the bank. Miller nodded. I will send a formal request for the footage. But sometimes, a face-to-face visit speeds things up. Just don't get arrested for causing a disturbance. We drove straight to the bank branch on 4th Street. It was the one stamped on the back of the cashed check. My stomach was doing flip-flops. A physical manifestation of the anxiety that had ruled my life for years. But now, at least, I knew the name of the anxiety. We asked for the branch manager. A woman named Mrs. Gable came out. She was polished and professional, wearing a scarf that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. Grandpa took the lead. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He simply laid the police report on her desk and spoke in a voice that was heavy with a lifetime of disappointed authority. My granddaughter is the victim of a felony, he said. This bank cashed a forged check for $4,000. We are working with Detective Miller. We need to know who stood at your teller window on May 20th at 2:14 p.m. Mrs. Gable looked at the report. She looked at me. She saw the dark circles under my eyes, the way my hands were gripping the arms of the chair. I cannot give you the footage directly, she said softly. That has to go to the police. I understand, Grandpa said. But can you look? Can you just tell us if it was her? He pointed a thumb at me. Mrs. Gable hesitated. Then she turned to her computer. She typed in the date and time. She clicked a few keys. She squinted at the screen. She turned the monitor slightly. Just a few inches. Enough for us to see. It was a black and white still image, grainy and distorted by the angle of the ceiling camera. But the figure at the counter was clear enough. It was a woman. She was wearing a trench coat. The collar popped up high. She was wearing oversized sunglasses that covered half her face, and she was wearing her hair in a messy bun. My hand flew to my mouth. It was my hairstyle. I wore my hair in a messy bun almost every day. It was my signature look because I never had time to style it, but the woman wasn't me. The posture was wrong. She was standing with her hip cocked, a stance of impatient arrogance I knew better than my own reflection. It is my mother, I whispered. She is dressed like you, Grandpa said. His voice was full of revulsion. She is wearing a costume. Audrey, she isn't just stealing the money. She is impersonating you. Mrs. Gable turned the screen back. I will burn a copy for the detective immediately, she said. Her voice was icy now. That is very disturbing. We walked out of the bank into the blinding afternoon sun. I felt cold. Deeply, shakingly cold. It was one thing to see a signature on a page. It was another to see my mother wearing my life like a disguise so she could rob me. My phone rang in my pocket. It was her. I stared at the screen. Mom, answer it, Grandpa said. Put it on speaker. I swiped the green button. Audrey? Her voice came through, high and wavering. Audrey, please tell me you aren't doing this. Doing what? I asked. Aunt Carol called me. She said you posted something on Facebook about identity theft. You didn't name us. But everyone knows. Audrey. Everyone is talking. I hadn't posted anything, but Grandpa had told a few of his friends at the coffee shop, and news in our town traveled faster than light. I am just cleaning up my records. Mom, I said, like you told me to. You are ruining us, she sobbed. The tears sounded wet and heavy. Your father is a wreck. He can't sleep. How can you be so cruel? We were only trying to help you. We were managing your assets because you were too busy with school. You forged my name on a $4,000 check. I said, you dressed up like me and went to the bank. There was a silence on the line. The sobbing stopped instantly. It was like a switch had been flipped. When she spoke again, her voice was dry and sharp as a razor. "If you report that, Audrey," she said, "the whole town will know what kind of daughter you are. They will know you are mentally unstable. We have the hospital records. We have the psychiatrist's notes. We will tell everyone that you gave us permission during one of your episodes, and now you are confused again. Who do you think they will believe? The pillar of the community? Or the girl who passed out at graduation?" I looked at Grandpa. He was recording the call on his own phone. "I think they will believe the video footage." I said. I hung up. My hand was shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone. She threatened me. I said, "She threatened to use my health against me." "That is what they do." Grandpa said, "When the tears don't work, they use the terror. But they are bluffing. Audrey, they are cornered animals." 10 minutes later, my phone rang again. "Dad," I answered. "Audrey, listen to me," he said. His voice was calm, reasonable, the voice he used when he was selling a bad investment to a client. "Your mother is upset. She is emotional. You know how she gets." I didn't say anything. "I want to propose a solution," he said. "We can fix this. We can make all this go away. I have drawn up some paperwork. It is a retroactive authorization. It just says that for the past 2 years, you appointed us as your financial managers. If you sign it, the bank inquiries go away. The credit issues go away. We will pay off the loans ourselves. We will handle everything." He paused. "We just want to simplify your accounts. Audrey, you don't need this stress. Just sign the paper, and we can go back to being a family." I realized then what he was doing. He wasn't offering a truce. He was offering a confession disguised as a contract. If I signed that retroactive authorization, I would be validating every crime they had committed. I would be admitting that I had given permission, and that I was the one who had lied to the police. I would be signing my own warrant. I am not signing anything. "Dad," I said, "Audrey, be reasonable. I am seeing an attorney." I said, "If you want to talk, you can talk to her." I hung up again. We went back to my apartment. I felt like I was under siege. Every car that passed looked like my father's sedan. Every shadow looked like my mother in a trench coat. I checked my mailbox on the way in. It was empty. It was always empty. Grandpa stopped at the manager's office. "Mr. Henderson was a nice man who watered the plants in the lobby." "Mr. Henderson." Grandpa said, "Can I ask you a question? When was the last time the mailbox key for apartment 2B was replaced?" "Mr. Henderson scratched his head. "Oh, about 6 months ago? Maybe 7? Your aunt came by. Or maybe it was your mother? The nice lady with the blonde hair. She said you lost yours down a storm drain. She had a copy of your lease and your ID, so I cut her a new one. Was that okay? She had my lease. She had my ID. It is fine." "Mr. Henderson," I said, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face. "If she comes back, don't give her anything else. In fact, can we change the lock today?" "I will get the maintenance guy on it," he said, looking concerned. We walked up the stairs to my apartment. I felt violated all over again. They hadn't just stolen the mail. They had tricked my neighbors. They had charmed their way into my privacy. Inside, we went back to work. I had the binder open. I was cross-referencing the dates on the credit report with my work schedule. March 3rd. Chase Sapphire card opened. I was at a regional conference in Chicago. April 12th. Prosper loan application. I was in a 3-hour final exam. The evidence was piling up. But then I found something that made the rest of it look like petty theft. I was looking at the transaction history for the Chase card, the one I had finally gotten access to after answering 50 security questions. I was looking for the car down payment. I found it. Toyota of North Hills, $5,000. But I also saw a recurring monthly charge. NyLife Prem, $315. NyLife, New York Life. "Grandpa," I said, "what is this?" He looked at the screen. "That is life insurance," he said. "I don't have life insurance." I said, I have a small policy through work for $10,000. I don't pay $300 a month. I called the number on the transaction line. I navigated the automated system. I gave them the policy number listed on the statement. This is the customer service line. How can I help you? Hi, I said. I am calling to check the details of a policy. I am the insured. Name? Audrey Brooks. Okay, Ms. Brooks. I see the policy here. A term life policy for $1 million, issued 6 months ago. $1 million. And who is the beneficiary? I asked. My voice was trembling so bad the words came out in a stutter. The primary beneficiary is, let's see, Janet Brooks, mother. And the owner of the policy? Janet Brooks. I hung up. I felt like all the blood had been drained from my body. They took out $1 million policy on me, I whispered. Grandpa went gray. He looked old. Suddenly, terrified. Audrey, he said, you don't buy $1 million policy on a healthy 33-year-old unless you expect a payout. I said, or unless you are planning to make one happen, he said. The silence in the room was deafening. We weren't talking about fraud anymore. We were talking about something much darker. The cognitive decline diagnosis, the proxy, the isolation, the pressure. If I had died, if I had collapsed on that stage and never woken up, or if I had accidentally taken too many pills because I was confused, they would have been rich. They would have paid off the debts they racked up in my name, and they would have had enough left over to live like kings. I am scared. Grandpa, I said, we are going to Maris, he said. Now. We met Maris at her office an hour later. She looked at the insurance statement. She took off her glasses and cleaned them. A slow, deliberate motion that terrified me more than if she had yelled. This changes things. She said, this establishes a motive for harm. It is not just financial exploitation. It is predatory. She looked at me. People don't buy insurance on you unless they are betting against your survival, or unless they want a lever. If they control your debt, and they control your death benefit, they own you completely. We set up a meeting. Maris insisted. She called my parents' attorney, a family friend of theirs who did estate planning, and demanded a sit-down. She told them if they didn't come, we were going straight to the district attorney with the insurance policy. They came. We met in the conference room of Maris's office. It was a neutral ground, smelling of lemon polish and old law books. My parents walked in looking like the victims. My mother was wearing black, as if she were in mourning. My father was wearing his serious business suit. They sat on the opposite side of the mahogany table. Maris sat next to me. Grandpa sat on my other side, his cane resting against the table leg. We are here to discuss the immediate restitution of Ms. Brooks's assets and the dissolution of all unauthorized accounts. Maris began. My father's lawyer, a man named Mr. Henderson, no relation to the building manager, cleared his throat. Look, Maris, he said, we all know the situation. Audrey has been struggling. My client stepped in to help manage her affairs. Maybe they overstepped on the paperwork, technically speaking, but the intent was protective. Protective? Maris asked. They took out $1 million life insurance policy on her without her knowledge. Is that protective? My mother spoke up. Her voice was soft, trembling. We just wanted to make sure she was covered. God forbid something happened. Look at her health. She collapsed. We were just being responsible parents. You forged her signature on a student loan refund check, Maris said. That is not responsibility. That is larceny. My father leaned forward. He flashed a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He tried to charm Maris. Maris, come on, he said. You know how young people are these days. Audrey is, well, she is bad with money. She gets confused. We were just pooling resources. It was all temporary. We were going to pay it back once she got on her feet. I am on my feet, I said. I have been working full-time for 3 years. I have a master's degree. I am not bad with money. You are? My father's smile vanished. You are ungrateful, he said. The mask slipped again. We raised you. We fed you, and you are going to count pennies? I am going to count the $1,000,000 you bet on my life. I said. Maris held up a hand. Here is the offer, she said. You will sign a confession of judgment for the full amount of the debt. You will surrender the car. You will sign a revocation of the insurance policy, and you will never contact her again. If you do this today, we might recommend that the DEA show leniency on the prison time, but the civil repayment is non-negotiable. My mother stood up. I am not signing that. I am not going to prison. I am a mother. Then you shouldn't have stolen from your child. Grandpa said. My mother glared at him. This is your fault. Dad, you poisoned her against us. You always liked her better. I liked her because she didn't lie to me. Grandpa said. The meeting ended in shouting. My father dragged my mother out, threatening to countersue for defamation. Mr. Henderson looked embarrassed and promised to talk sense into them. When they were gone, the room felt heavy. Maris looked at me. We have them on the ropes, she said, but they are going to fight dirty. They are going to drag this out. They are going to try to destroy your reputation before the court date. I don't care about my reputation, I said. I just want my name back. We walked out to the car. The sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the pavement. Grandpa stopped before he got into the driver's seat. He leaned heavily against the doorframe. He looked gray. Grandpa? I said. Are you okay? He took a shallow breath. I have to tell you something. Audrey, he said. What? I have been putting off a test. He said, the doctor found a spot on my lung a few months ago. He wanted to biopsy it. I didn't go because I was worried about you. I didn't want to be sick while you were finishing school. I stared at him. The world seemed to stop spinning. A spot? I whispered. He nodded. But now I am worried I waited too long. I feel it. Audrey, I am tired, deep tired. He looked at me, his eyes fierce and urgent. We can't wait for them to become decent people, he said, and we can't wait for the slow wheels of justice. I need to know you are safe before I can't help you anymore. Time. It wasn't just money they had stolen. They had stolen the time I should have spent with him. They had stolen his peace of mind. I hugged him right there in the parking lot. He felt frail, his bones sharp under his old jacket. We will finish this, I said into his shoulder. I promise. We will finish this fast. I realized then that the binder, the detective, the lawyer, it wasn't enough. I needed to end it. I needed to cut the cord so completely that they could never bleed us again. And I had to do it before the spot on his lung grew any bigger. I drove us home. Grandpa slept in the passenger seat, his mouth open, his breathing ragged. I watched the road. But I was planning a party, a graduation party. They wanted a show? I would give them a show. I would give them a finale they would never forget. The invitation I sent out was printed on heavy cream cardstock, the kind that felt expensive to the touch. It read, A celebration of new beginnings. Please join Audrey Brooks to mark her graduation and the next chapter. To my friends and coworkers. It looked like a party. To my parents, it looked like a white flag. I knew they would interpret the invitation as a surrender. They would see it as me crawling back to the fold, seeking their approval after my brief, hysterical rebellion. They would think the silence of the last 3 days was me licking my wounds. Realizing I couldn't survive without their management, they were wrong. It wasn't a party. It was a deposition with appetizers. In the 48 hours leading up to the Saturday night dinner, I engaged in a systematic scrubbing of my digital existence. I sat in the back room of Maris's office, using her secure Wi-Fi, and methodically cut every cord that bound me to them. I created a new email address that didn't use any variation of my name that they would guess. I set up 2-factor authentication on everything, linking it to a burner phone I had bought at a drugstore with cash. I went to a different bank, a credit union across the river, and opened a new checking account. Depositing the cash Grandpa had given me from his mattress fund, I rented a safe deposit box at that credit union. I placed my newly recovered passport inside. I placed the affidavit of forgery inside, and I placed the binder inside. It felt like I was preparing for a disappearance. In a way, I was the Audrey they knew, the pliable, anxious, grateful daughter who signed whatever was put in front of her, was vanishing. I updated my emergency contacts at work. I removed father and mother. I replaced them with grandfather and Maris Ellery. I changed the beneficiary on my small 401k from parents to estate. Every click of the mouse felt like severing a nerve. It was painful, but it was the pain of a bone setting, not a bone breaking. On the morning of the party, Grandpa came over to help me set up. He moved slower than usual. His breathing was audible, a soft wheeze that rattled in his chest like dry leaves. He sat in my kitchen chair, polishing his glasses, while I arranged flowers. "Are you ready for this?" he asked. "I am terrified," I admitted. I cut the stem of a rose with a sharp snap, but I can't keep living in the dark. "Grandpa, if I don't do this publicly, they will just spin it. They will tell everyone I'm crazy. They will tell everyone I am confused. I need witnesses." He nodded. "Witnesses are good. Witnesses make it hard to lie." The venue was a private dining room at a bistro called The Hearth. It was neutral ground, public enough to prevent a violent outburst, private enough to keep the conversation contained. I had invited 15 people, 3 close friends from my program, 4 coworkers who had seen me exhausted and gray for years, Grandpa, Maris, a notary named Ben, who we were introducing as Maris's nephew, and my parents. They arrived last. It was a power move. Of course, make the room wait, make the graduates sweat. When the door opened, the air in the room seemed to get sucked out. My mother swept in wearing a dress that was slightly too formal for a dinner, a shimmering silver number that caught the light. She looked tragic and beautiful, the grieving mother who had been wronged but was gracious enough to forgive. My father followed, wearing his best suit, a forced smile plastered on his face. "Audrey!" my mother cried out, her voice pitching up into a theatrical register of delight. She rushed toward me, arms open. The room went silent. My friends watched, unsure of the dynamic. They only knew I had a complicated family. They didn't know I was sleeping with a taser on my nightstand. I let her hug me. Her perfume was overpowering, a floral scent that I had associated with comfort for 30 years and now associated with suffocation. "We are so proud of you," she whispered in my ear. Her grip was tight, her nails digging into my shoulder blade. "We knew you would come to your senses." She pulled back, beaming at the guests. "Isn't she beautiful? Our little MBA." My father stepped up and shook my hand firmly. He didn't hug me. He looked at me with a cold, appraising stare, checking for cracks in my resolve. "Good to see you." "Audrey," he said, "we brought you something." He handed me a heavy, rectangular box wrapped in gold paper. "Open it now," my mother insisted, turning to the room. We wanted to get her something special, a legacy gift. I unwrapped it. It was a watch, a Rolex. It was beautiful, heavy, and undeniably expensive. It was worth more than my car. I opened the card tucked inside. It was written in my mother's looping script. "To our brilliant daughter. Time is precious, and we want you to have the best. We love you more than you know." And then, at the very bottom, in a smaller, cramped hand, "We can still fix this if you sign." I stared at the words. It was a bribe. It was a $5,000 handcuff. They were buying my silence with a timepiece, hoping I would be too dazzled by the flash to notice the ticking. "Thank you," I said. My voice was steady. "It is very generous." I closed the box and set it on the table. I didn't put it on. My mother's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she recovered quickly. "Well, let's eat." I am famished. The dinner was a surreal performance of normalcy. My parents worked the room. They charmed my boss. They laughed at my friends' jokes. They played the role of the supportive, successful parents to perfection. They ignored Grandpa completely, acting as if the chair he sat in was empty. Midway through the main course, the door opened, and a man walked in. He was older, balding, wearing a cardigan that had seen better days. He looked nervous. clutching a hat in his hands. It was Arthur Henderson, not the building manager, and not the lawyer. This was the accountant who had done my parents' taxes for 20 years until he abruptly retired 3 years ago. The room went quiet. My father dropped his fork. It clattered against the china with a sharp ping. "Arthur?" my father said. His voice was tight. "What are you doing here?" "I invited him." I said. I stood up. "Arthur, please, take a seat." Arthur didn't sit. He looked at my father, then at me. He looked like a man who was about to walk into a firing squad. I wanted to say congratulations. "Audrey," Arthur said. His voice shook, and I wanted to clear my conscience. "Arthur, this is a private party." My father stood up, his napkin falling to the floor. "You are not well. You should go. Let him speak," Grandpa said. He spoke from his corner, his voice rasping but clear. "Sit down, son." My father glared at Grandpa, then looked around the room. He saw the eyes of my boss, my friends, the friends of the family. He realized he couldn't cause a scene without breaking the character he was playing. He sat down. Slowly, Arthur looked at me. "Audrey," he said, "I quit working for your parents 3 years ago. Do you know why?" I shook my head. "Because I couldn't move the numbers anymore," he said. "I couldn't make the math work without crossing lines I wasn't willing to cross." He took a deep breath. "Your parents have been in trouble for a long time," he said. "Tax liens, failed investments. They were living on a house of cards. When the IRS started asking questions, they needed a shield. They needed assets that weren't in their names." He looked down at his hands. "They used you. Audrey, they kept your credit clean specifically so they could use it as a dumping ground. They put the bad debt in your name so their personal sheets looked clean enough to get new loans. It was a shell game, and you were the shell." My mother let out a high, incredulous laugh. "Arthur, you are senile. This is ridiculous." "Audrey, he has been confused since his wife died." "I am not confused." "Janet," Arthur said. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "I kept copies. I have the emails where you asked me to route the overdue notices to a P.O. box so Audrey wouldn't see them." He placed the paper on the table in front of me. I looked at it. It was an email from my father. Subject: A. Brooks accounts. Body: just move the liability to her file. She doesn't check her scores. We need to clear the lien before the bank audit on Friday. I felt a cold numbness spread through my limbs. It wasn't just greed. It was survival. They were drowning, and they had decided to use my body as a raft. "The degree," I whispered. I looked at my parents. My mother was pale, her hand clutching her wine glass so hard I thought it would shatter. "That is why you wanted me to graduate," I said. It wasn't about pride. It was about making me bankable. "A graduate with an MBA has a higher earning potential," Maris said from across the table. Her voice was calm, legal. "Lenders look at earning potential. They look at stability. A student is a risk. A graduate with a corporate job is a prime borrower." I looked at my father. "You needed me to finish so you could borrow more." My father didn't say anything. His eyes were fixed on Arthur, burning with a hatred so pure it was almost impressive. "It gets worse," Grandpa said. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick, yellowed envelope. He slid it across the white tablecloth. "Open it." "Audrey." I picked up the envelope. The seal was old and brittle. I tore it open. Inside were receipts, dozens of them, and canceled checks. University bursar, paid by Frank Miller. University bookstore, paid by Frank Miller. Housing deposit, paid by Frank Miller. I looked up at Grandpa. "You paid?" I asked. "For the first 2 years. Grandpa said, "Before I ran out of liquid cash, I paid your tuition. I paid for your books. I paid for that dorm room they told you was too expensive. But I turned to my mother. You told me you took out a second mortgage to pay for my school. You told me you sacrificed your retirement. You told me that every semester was a burden that was crushing you." "Guilt," Grandpa said. "They used guilt to make you feel like you owed them. If you think you owe them your education, you don't question when they ask for a signature. You don't question when they ask for help with the bills. I looked at the receipts. $10,000, $5,000, $3,000. They hadn't paid a dime. Grandpa had paid, and they had taken the credit and the leverage. The room was deadly silent. My friends were staring at their plates, horrified. My boss looked like he wanted to call the police. My mother stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "This is an ambush," she hissed. "You ungrateful, spiteful girl. We bring you a Rolex, and you bring a senile accountant and lies. It is not a lie." "Mom," I said. I held up the email. I held up the receipts. "And it is not an ambush," I said. "It is a revocation." I nodded to Maris. Maris stood up. She wasn't just a friend anymore. She was a shark in a blazer. She pulled a folder from her bag. "Janet, Stephen," she said, "I am representing Audrey in the matter of her estate and financial affairs." She opened the folder and laid 3 documents on the table next to the Rolex. "This is a formal revocation of all power of attorney documents, known and unknown. This is a revocation of the healthcare proxy. And this is a cease and desist regarding the use of Audrey's identity for any financial instruments." Ben, the notary, stepped forward. He pulled a stamp out of his pocket. "I have witnessed the principal's identity and intent," Ben said. He stamped the papers. Thump, thump, thump. The sound echoed like gunshots. "You have been served," Maris said. "Copies will be sent to your attorney tomorrow. The originals are already filed with the county clerk." My father stood up slowly. He looked at the papers, then at me. The charm was gone. The anger was gone. There was only a cold, reptilian calculation in his eyes. "You are making a mistake. Audrey," he said, "you think you are independent? You are one bad day away from ruin, and when you fall, and you will fall, we won't be there to catch you. You weren't there to catch me on Tuesday." I said, "You were checking the billing codes." My mother grabbed her purse. "Come on, Stephen. We are leaving. She is obviously having a breakdown. We will let the doctors deal with this." They walked out. They didn't look back. They didn't take the Rolex. When the door closed, I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 20 years. My hands were shaking. Grandpa reached over and covered my hand with his. "You did it," he whispered. I looked around the room. My friends were looking at me with a new expression. It wasn't pity, it was respect. "I am sorry about the dinner." I said to the group, "Are you kidding?" My coworker Sarah said, "That was the most badass thing I've ever seen." Mr. Henderson, Arthur, was wiping his eyes with a handkerchief. "I am sorry." "Audrey," he said, "I should have told you sooner." But I was afraid of them. They threatened to report me for the things they made me do. "You are brave." "Arthur," I said, "thank you." The party continued. But the mood had shifted. It was somber, but lighter. We drank the wine. We ate the cake. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the other shoe hadn't just dropped. It was waiting to stomp on me. Why did they leave so easily? I asked Maris quietly as we were paying the bill. "They didn't," Maris said. "They are regrouping. They realize they lost the skirmish, so they are going to retreat and prepare for the war. They are going to attack your credibility. They are going to claim you are mentally incompetent. That is their only play left to invalidate those revocations. The medical vulnerability." I said, "Exactly," Maris said. "They will use the collapse. They will use the confusion. They will say you were coerced by your grandfather." I looked at Grandpa. He was laughing with Ben the notary, but he looked gray. His skin had a translucent, papery quality that scared me. I stepped outside for some air. The restaurant had a small patio in the back, near the parking lot. I needed to clear the smell of my mother's perfume from my nose. The night air was cool. I leaned against the brick wall. Closing my eyes, I heard voices. Hushed, angry whispers coming from around the corner. Near where the dumpsters were, it was them. They hadn't left. "She has the receipts." "Janet," my father's voice hissed. "So what?" my mother snapped. "Receipts aren't a legal contract. We can say we reimbursed him in cash. Who is going to prove otherwise? He is half dead. We need to move the funds before the revocation hits the banks." My father said, "If we do it tonight, the electronic transfer will clear before Monday morning." "We can't." My mother said, "You heard Arthur? He gave her the account numbers. She will flag it. We have to try." My father said, "We can't lose that trust. Janet, it is the only thing keeping the house from foreclosure." The trust. They weren't talking about the loans. They were talking about the educational trust Grandpa had told me about, the $40,000. And then I heard my mother say something that made my blood freeze. "It is not just the trust. Stephen, it is what Dad promised her. If she gets her hands on the deed to the hardware store property, we are finished. That land is the collateral for the bridge loan." The hardware store? Grandpa had sold the store years ago, or so I thought. I listened, holding my breath. He never sold the land. My father whispered, "He leased it. He kept the deed in his name. He told me he was saving it for Audrey's future. If she finds out she owns a commercial lot downtown, she will sell it," my mother said, "and the bank will call our loan immediately." They weren't just stealing my present. They were leveraging an asset I didn't even know I had. A commercial lot? That land was worth 10 times what the trust was worth. They were mortgaged to the hilt, using property that belonged to Grandpa, and eventually me, as security for their debts. "We need to get him declared incompetent too." My father said, "It is the only way. If we can get power of attorney over Dad, we can control the deed." I stepped back, my shoe crunching softly on gravel. The voices stopped instantly. I turned and walked back into the restaurant, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. They were going to come for Grandpa. I walked back to the table. Grandpa was finishing his coffee. "Grandpa," I said. My voice was low, urgent. He looked up. "What is it?" "We need to go." I said, "Now. Why? I just heard them." I whispered, "They are in the parking lot. Grandpa, the hardware store." His eyes widened. A flash of genuine fear crossed his face. "They know?" he asked. "They know you still own the land." I said, "And they are planning to have you declared incompetent so they can take it." Grandpa gripped the table. He tried to stand, but his legs gave out. He slumped back into the chair, clutching his chest. "Grandpa!" I shouted. The room froze. Maris was at his side in a second. "It is my chest," Grandpa wheezed. His face was turning a terrifying shade of gray. "I can't breathe." "Call 911, someone yelled. "No," Grandpa gasped, grabbing my arm. "No hospital." "If I go to the hospital, they will come. They will use it. We have to." "Grandpa," I said, tears streaming down my face. "You are having a heart attack." Maris looked at me. "Audrey, if he goes into the system, they might petition for guardianship if he is incapacitated. I don't care about the land," I screamed. "I care about him." I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking, but I dialed the numbers. 911. "What is your emergency?" "My grandfather is collapsing." I said, "We are at the hearth on Main Street." As I hung up, I looked out the window. My parents' car was pulling out of the parking lot. They were driving away. They had heard the sirens, or maybe they had seen us through the window. They were leaving him to die, and I realized, with a clarity that cut through the panic, that this was their plan B. If they couldn't control me, and they couldn't control him, they would just wait for nature to do the dirty work. I held Grandpa's hand as the paramedics ran in. "Stay with me," I begged. "You have to stay with me. You are the only evidence I have." He looked at me, his eyes dimming. "The deed," he whispered, "under the floorboards, in the shed." Then his eyes rolled back, and the monitor the paramedics hooked up to him began to scream. I stood there, surrounded by the wreckage of my celebration, watching the only person who loved me fight for his life, and I knew that if he died, the war wouldn't be over. It would just be me, alone, against two people who would sell my grief for a line of credit. I looked at Maris. "Lock the house," I said. "Go to his house. Lock it down." Maris nodded. She understood. I climbed into the ambulance. The siren wailed, a long, mournful sound that echoed through the dark streets. It sounded like a declaration of war. The conference room at the mediation center was painted a color I could only describe as aggressive beige. It was a windowless box designed to suck the emotion out of conflicts, leaving only the dry husk of negotiation. The air conditioning was humming a low, monotonous note that vibrated in the table. I sat on one side of the laminate table. Maris was to my right, her posture rigid, her legal pad ready. Grandpa was to my left. He looked translucent. After the ambulance ride on Saturday night, the doctors had wanted to keep him for a week. They said his heart was functioning at 60%. They said stress was a loaded gun pointed at his chest. But he had signed himself out against medical advice this morning. He was wearing his best suit, though the collar hung loose around his neck now. I am not dying in a hospital bed while they steal your inheritance. He had told me in the parking lot, I am dying on the battlefield or not at all. So here we were, the battlefield. My parents sat opposite us. They looked less like generals and more like cornered animals trying to look like house pets. My mother was wearing a soft pink cardigan and clutching a tissue, dabbing at dry eyes. My father was reviewing a stack of papers with his attorney, Mr. Henderson, trying to project an air of bored competence. At the head of the table sat Mr. Greaves, the court-appointed mediator. He was a soft-spoken man with a beard that hid his expression. We are here to discuss a restructuring of familial assets and a resolution to the allegations of financial mismanagement. Mr. Greaves said. He looked at me. Ms. Brooks, you requested this meeting as a precursor to filing formal charges. The floor is yours. I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but my hands were steady. I placed the binder on the table. It made a heavy, decisive thud. This is not a mismanagement dispute, I said. My voice sounded strange in the small room. Flat, devoid of the tremor that used to be my constant companion. This is a chronicle of systematic theft. I opened the binder to the first tab. Exhibit A, I said, May 15th, a check issued by the university bursar for $4,200. I slid the color copy across the table. It was mailed to an address I did not live at. It was endorsed with a signature that is not mine, and it was deposited into a joint account held by Stephen and Janet Brooks. My father didn't look at the paper. He looked at Mr. Greaves. We have already explained this, he said, his voice smooth and patronizing. Audrey owes us a significant amount of money for living expenses during her 20s. We had a verbal agreement that any refunds would go toward that debt. We were simply facilitating the transfer. I turned the page. Exhibit B, I said. A change of address form filed with the United States Postal Service on January 10th. It redirected all mail from my apartment to 14 Oak Creek Drive. I looked at my mother. I did not sign this form, I said, and because I did not receive my mail, I did not see the notices for the credit cards opened in my name. My mother let out a small, wounded noise. Audrey, you are making it sound so sinister. You were so busy with work. You were drowning. We were just trying to organize your paperwork. We put the mail in a box for you. It is sitting in the guest room right now. You open the mail. Mom, I said, and you use the information inside to apply for loans. I flipped to the next section. This was the heavy artillery. Exhibit C, I said, a life insurance policy issued by New York Life, face value, $1 million, insured, Audrey Brooks, owner, Janet Brooks. The room went dead silent. Even Mr. Henderson, their lawyer, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He looked at the paper, then at my parents. Why do you have $1 million policy on your daughter? Mr. Greaves asked. His voice was neutral, but his eyebrows had climbed toward his hairline. My father cleared his throat. It is a standard estate planning tool to cover funeral expenses and lingering debts in the event of a tragedy. $1 million for a funeral? I asked. We wanted the best for you, my mother cried out. She slammed her hand on the table. Why do you twist everything? We love you. We have sacrificed our lives for you. And you sit there with your binder and treat us like criminals? Because you are criminals, Grandpa said. His voice was a gravelly rumble. He didn't stand up. He didn't have the strength. but his eyes were burning with a fire that terrified me. "You didn't buy that policy for a funeral," Grandpa said. "You bought it because you knew the stress you were putting her under. You knew she was collapsing. You were betting on the horse to break its leg." "That is enough," my father shouted. He stood up, his face flushing a deep, ugly purple. "I will not sit here and be insulted by a senile old man and a daughter who is clearly having a mental breakdown." He turned to the mediator. "This is what we are dealing with. Mr. Greaves, she is unstable. She collapsed on stage 3 days ago. She has a history of confusion. She is being manipulated by her grandfather, who has always had a vendetta against us because we are successful, and he is a failed shopkeeper." I looked at my father. "Successful?" I turned to the next tab in the binder. "Exhibit D," I said, "a copy of the tax lien filed against Stephen and Janet Brooks in 2021. Amount owed, $65,000. I flipped the page. Exhibit E, a foreclosure notice on the property at 14 Oak Creek Drive. Dated 3 months ago. I looked at him. "You aren't successful. Dad, you are broke. You have been broke for years, and you have been using my identity to patch the holes in your sinking ship." My father's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like he had been slapped. The narrative of the benevolent, wealthy patriarch had just been shattered in front of a stranger. "You used my credit score because yours is ruined," I said. "You wanted me to graduate so I would have a high income to co-sign the refinancing on the house. You weren't proud of me. You were hungry." My mother began to weep. It was a loud, ugly sound. "We did it for the family," she wailed. "We were going to lose the house. Where would we go? We didn't want you to worry. We were protecting you." "By stealing from me?" I asked. "By forging my name? We were going to pay it back," she screamed. "Once the business turned around. It was a loan. A family loan. It wasn't a loan," I said. "It was an extraction." I closed the binder. "I am not here to negotiate a payment plan," I said. "I am here to tell you that it is over." I looked at Maris. She pulled a document from her briefcase. "This is a formal settlement agreement," Maris said. "It stipulates that you will accept full liability for the fraudulent debt. You will sign a confession of judgment. You will surrender the title to the Toyota you bought in Audrey's name, and you will permanently renounce any claim to the educational trust or the hardware store deed." The hardware store. My father's head snapped up. He glanced at Grandpa. "You can't do that," my father said. "The deed isn't yours to control. It belongs to Dad. And Dad is, well, looking at him, he isn't competent to manage real estate. We have already filed a petition for emergency guardianship." I felt a cold shock go through me. They had filed it. They had actually done it. "Mr. Henderson looked at his client. "You filed a petition? When?" "This morning," my father said, a smug look returning to his face. "We have a doctor's affidavit stating that my father is suffering from advanced cardiac failure and cognitive decline. He is endangering his assets. As his next of kin, we have a duty to step in." He looked at Grandpa with a mixture of pity and triumph. "Sorry, Dad," he said, "but we can't let you throw away the family legacy because you are angry. We are taking control of the deed." Grandpa smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who had set a trap and was watching the wolf step into it. "You filed a petition?" Grandpa asked. "Yes," my father said. "It is for your own good." "And did you read the terms of the trust I set up for Audrey?" Grandpa asked. "The one holding the funds you were so desperate to get?" My father frowned. "What does the trust have to do with the deed?" "Everything," Grandpa said. He reached into his jacket pocket. His hand shook, but he pulled out a folded blue document. "Clause 14, Section B," Grandpa recited, not looking at the paper. "The anti-corruption protocol." He looked at my father. "I wrote that trust 20 years ago. Stephen, I knew you. I knew you even then. So I put in a clause. If the beneficiaries or the trustees, that is you, are ever found to be engaged in fraud, theft, or exploitation against the primary beneficiary, that is Audrey, the trust doesn't just dissolve." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. It triggers an automatic transfer of all associated assets, including the assets of the grantor. He tapped the table. The deed to the hardware store land isn't in my name anymore. Stephen, it was linked to the trust, and the moment you cashed that forged check, you violated the corruption clause. Grandpa slid the blue paper across the table. As of 3 days ago, when we filed the police report for forgery, the trust executed its safety protocol. The hardware store land now belongs to Audrey, irrevocably. My father stared at the paper. He picked it up, his hands trembling violently. He read the paragraph. He read it again. No. He whispered, no, that land is worth $500,000. It is the collateral for the bridge loan. If we lose the collateral, the bank calls the loan. I said, and you lose the house. My father looked at me. His eyes were wide, terrified voids. Audrey, you can't, he said. If you take the land, we are on the street. We will be homeless. You made your choice. I said, you bet the house on my silence. You lost. My mother made a sound like a wounded animal. She stood up, her chair crashing backward. Give me that, she screamed. She lunged across the table. Her hands were clawed, reaching for the binder, for the blue paper, for anything she could destroy. Audrey, watch out, Maris yelled. Mr. Greaves, the mediator, moved faster than I expected. He stood up and caught my mother's wrist just as she reached the binder. Mrs. Brooks, he shouted, sit down. My mother was panting, her hair flying loose from its perfect coiffure. She looked wild. She looked exactly like the woman in the bank surveillance video. Desperate, entitled, and dangerous. Let go of me, she shrieked. It is all lies. She is stealing from us. She is the thief. She looked at me, her eyes filled with hate. I wish you had died on that stage, she screamed. It would have been cleaner. The silence that followed that sentence was absolute. It hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. My father closed his eyes. He knew. He knew she had just said the quiet part out loud. She had just confirmed the insurance motive in front of a court-appointed official. Mr. Greaves released my mother's wrist. He looked at her with a mixture of pity and professional horror. I think we are done here, Mr. Greaves said quietly. I will be submitting my report to the court, and I will be including that statement in the record. My mother sank back into her chair, sobbing into her hands. It wasn't the sobbing of a victim anymore. It was the sobbing of a child who had broken a toy and realized it couldn't be fixed. I looked at the settlement agreement on the table. I picked up the pen. I am signing the criminal complaint. I said, I signed my name, Audrey Brooks. The signature was sharp, angular, and undeniably mine. I pushed the paper toward Mr. Henderson. You can tell your clients that the civil suit will follow next week. I said, I want my name off the car. I want my name off the credit cards, and I want them out of my life. My father looked at the paper. He looked at me, for the first time. I didn't see the looming giant of my childhood. I saw a small, tired man in a cheap suit who had spent his life running a con that had finally run out of road. You are destroying this family, he whispered. The family was destroyed a long time ago. Dad, I said, I am just sweeping up the glass. Grandpa stood up. He used the table to leverage himself, his knuckles white. Let's go. Audrey, he said. We walked out. We didn't look back. Behind us, I heard my mother starting to scream at my father, a high, keening sound of blame and panic. We walked out of the building into the bright, blinding sunlight of the parking lot. The air smelled of asphalt and exhaust. Grandpa made it to the car door before his legs gave out. He didn't fall. He just crumpled, sliding down the side of the sedan until he was sitting on the pavement. Grandpa! I dropped the binder and fell to my knees beside him. He was gasping for air, his hand clutching his chest. His face was gray, slick with sweat. It is okay, he wheezed. It is just the adrenaline leaving. I fumbled for my phone. I need to call the ambulance again. No, he said. He grabbed my wrist. His grip was weak. like a bird's claw. Just give me a minute. I sat there on the hot asphalt, holding him. I watched the cars drive by on the main road. People going to work, people going to lunch, normal lives. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. We won. I whispered. He looked at me. His eyes were milky, but they were smiling. We did. He said softly, we beat them. But as I listened to the rattle in his chest, I knew the cost. He had spent his last reserve of strength to play that card. He had traded his time for my freedom. Two realities crashed into me at once. I was free. I was finally truly free of the people who had farmed me like a crop, but I was about to lose the only person who had ever watered me. I am not going to make it to the hearing. Am I? Grandpa asked. It wasn't a question of fear. It was a question of logistics. I squeezed his hand. You are going to make it. I lied. He closed his eyes. It is okay. Audrey, you don't need me for the hearing. You have the binder. You have the deed. You have yourself. He took a deep, shuddering breath. I did my job, he whispered. I got you out. We sat there for 20 minutes until his breathing steadied enough for me to help him into the car. I drove him home. I put him to bed. I made him soup he didn't eat. I sat by his bed until the sun went down, watching his chest rise and fall, memorizing the rhythm. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I walked into the hallway to answer it. It was Detective Miller. Ms. Brooks, he said. I have an update. Did you get the warrant? I asked. We did. He said, we pulled the records for the bank account your parents were using, the one the check was deposited into. And? It is ugly. Audrey, he said, we found transfers. Monthly transfers coming in from 3 other accounts. Different names. Elderly people. I felt a chill run down my spine. What are you saying? I am saying your parents weren't just doing this to you. Miller said. They were running a power of attorney scheme on members of their church, people who trusted them to help with their finances. You were just the biggest fish. My stomach turned over. It wasn't personal. That was the worst part. It wasn't that they hated me, or loved me too much, or wanted to control me. I was just another revenue stream. I was a line item on a ledger of exploitation. We are bringing them in for questioning tonight, Miller said. The DA is looking at multiple counts of elder abuse and grand larceny. You gave us the key. Audrey, you broke the whole thing open. Thank you. Detective, I said. I hung up. I checked on Grandpa one last time. He was sleeping deeply, the sleep of the exhausted victorious. I drove back to my apartment. The city lights blurred in my vision. I felt hollowed out, scraped clean. I parked the car. I walked up the stairs. When I reached my door, I stopped. It was slightly ajar, just a crack, maybe half an inch. I knew I had locked it. I remembered turning the deadbolt. I remembered the click. My heart started to hammer again. The old fear, the conditioned response, flooded my veins. I pushed the door open with my foot, staying in the hallway. Hello? I called out. Silence. I stepped inside. The apartment was dark. I flipped the switch. Nothing looked different. The TV was there. The laptop was on the table. But then I saw it. The drawer of the side table, the one where I kept my spare keys and my old journals, was pulled open. Just slightly. I walked over to it. Inside, my journals were shifted. The stack was messy, and a single piece of paper was sitting on top. It was a note, not written on paper, but scrawled on the back of a takeout menu in black marker. This isn't over. We are family. I stared at the handwriting. It was jagged, hurried. My father's hand. They had been here. Before the police picked them up, before the walls closed in. They had come here one last time. To scare me? To steal something? Or just to remind me that locks were only suggestions to people who felt they owned you? I picked up the note. I walked to the kitchen sink. I took a lighter from the drawer. I lit the corner of the menu. I watched the flame curl the paper, turning the black marker into gray ash. I watched the word family disappear into smoke. They were wrong. It was over. I wasn't their asset anymore. I wasn't their retirement plan. I wasn't their daughter. I was the witness who burned them down. I dropped the burning paper into the sink and turned on the water. The ash swirled down the drain. Black and final. I went to the door and engaged the deadbolt. Then I engaged the chain. Then I wedged a chair under the handle. I sat down on the floor. Leaning against the door, I was safe. But I knew I would never sleep with the window open again. The paper trail was closed. The binder was full. The trust was mine. But as I sat there in the dark, listening to the sirens in the distance, I realized that revenge wasn't a victory lap. It was just survival with a different name. I closed my eyes and waited for the morning. Thank you for walking this difficult road with Audrey. This story, When I Collapsed at My Graduation, was an exploration of how the people supposed to protect us can sometimes be the ones we need protection from. It is a story about the quiet, terrifying violence of financial abuse and the courage it takes to cut the ties that bind. I would love to hear from you. Where are you listening from today? Have you ever had to draw a hard line with family to save yourself? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you found value in Audrey's journey, please subscribe to Revenge Stories. We are building a library of justice, one story at a time, until the next chapter. Keep your documents safe and your eyes open.